Hey there, Mrs. Paul here. Welcome to second semester, and welcome to anybody who may be new to the class. Hopefully you guys have a notebook ready. We're going to be using our notebook today. We're going to label some pages and finish up this unit. And then if your notebook is running out, now would be a good time to start thinking about getting a new one for our next unit, which is Unit 4, and we're going to be covering photosynthesis. But for now, sorry I don't have Kai so you can see him. He's kind of fussy right now and he wants to sleep. So I'll be showing you plenty of pictures when I come back. And so I will be coming back on Monday, February 27th. So just a few more weeks. So let me tell you a little bit about what's happening this week and what our topics are. We're finishing off our unit on genetics. And now that we've learned about genetics, we can apply that knowledge to explain what happens to cause natural selection, which will in turn cause evolution. So this week we're going to focus on natural selection. So you guys are going to be watching a video about how natural selection is happening right now and causing evolution to occur. And then you will be able to hopefully do a lab on Thursday. And it's a pretty fun lab. My students enjoy it every year. So work hard to answer some questions and learn about natural selection with this video, and you'll be able to do that lab on Thursday. So let's get to it. Remember that as you go through this, there are going to be questions, and you need to write those in your notebook and answer those in your notebook and on the video, and you can only continue in the video if you answer those questions. And by practicing, that's helping you apply this information and be able to learn it better. At the end, you're going to be recording the chart in your notebook, and I'll be giving you a page for that. So let's take a look. First off, let's label some things in our notebook. So here are the page numbers if you are in the advanced class periods 2 and 3, and here are the page numbers for the regular class periods 4 and 7. So go ahead and pause the video and take a couple minutes to title each page with whatever it says here. You should have a couple already. You should have done that in class. But go ahead and pause the video and take a look at the rest. So let's see. Our objectives is the first thing, either page 175 or page 167. And so here are the objectives that we're going to cover for the next couple of weeks as we learn about natural selection and evolution. Overall, our big objective is that I can explain the factors that affect biological evolution. So I know I can do this when, first, I can explain common ancestry as evidence for variation and similarities in species. Next, I can explain how a random genetic mutation may or may not allow a species to survive and reproduce in a given environment called a niche. Next, I can predict and describe the effect of natural selection on a population. Then I can explain biological evolution as the interactions of 4 factors. I can classify organisms using similarities and differences in physical and functional characteristics. I can explain common ancestry in relation to genes in similar and non-similar organisms. And lastly, I can use the fossil record, anatomical and/or DNA similarities as evidence for biological evolution. So go ahead and record these in your notebook. Again, pause the video, record these in your notebook. We are going to be covering most of these in our video today, but these last 3 are moving on to evolution and evidence of evolution, which we'll learn about next week. So go ahead and pause and record. So let's take a look at natural selection. By natural selection, we're saying that there is a population of organisms that are adapting over time due to competition where the weak die and the strong live and reproduce. So what this is saying is that they are being selected naturally and for specific traits. So the ones that have strong traits, maybe they're plants that are tall enough to get more sun and they shade over all of the small, short plants. So they're the strong ones. They get to live and they get to reproduce. And so over time, that population of plants will have a lot of plants that are tall because the tall gene is being passed on and not the short one. And so they've adapted to being taller. This doesn't happen overnight. Evolution takes millions of years, and it's all these small, naturally selected traits that are going to end up causing evolution over millions of years. And that's what you should have seen in the Galapagos video. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So let's take a look at natural selection. Populations can adapt by 4 different things. So here you see we got 4 arrows, and we're going to take a look at these one at a time. So first, they can adapt by competition. So that was in our definition of natural selection. Competition occurs. Competition can occur with the same species. So here we have some animals that are all of the same species fighting against each other. Maybe they're fighting for a mate. There can be competition with other species. So here we have this poor little guy that the birds are trying to take his food. It can be competition with predators. So actually, here's a little story for you. Here is a dodo bird. You may recognize dodo birds from the video Ice Age. So here they are fighting over the fruit. But dodo birds actually existed, and they existed up until about the 1600s. And they existed on this small little island near Madagascar. And these dodo birds are giant flightless birds. They can't fly. And so once trading started to happen and ships started sailing around the world more, there were ships that landed on this island, and with those ships, there were a lot of animals and things that they brought with them. And they started to inhabit this island that had the dodo birds. And the dodo birds couldn't adapt. They were flightless. And so if there were animals that they started competing with, and the dodo birds just couldn't compete. They had nowhere to go. They had nothing to protect themselves. And so they started dying. They were too weak. They couldn't live. And so they started dying and eventually became extinct because of this competition with other species. Along with that, these dodo birds ate these seeds from a specific tree, and the only way that this tree could reproduce is when the dodo bird ate the seeds and digested them a little bit and then pooped them out somewhere else on the island, and then the trees were able to reproduce. And so because the dodo birds went extinct, the trees went extinct as well. So a little example for you. Here's another example of competition with predators. And then lastly, diseases. Diseases can compete with you as well. And if you are strong, you will probably be able to live and you'll be able to reproduce and pass that trait on to your offspring. Here's an example of a child that has smallpox. Smallpox has been eradicated. There's a vaccine for it. But smallpox can be deadly if it ever does come back. And so you may be competing for mates, for food and water, and for habitat. And so we saw some examples of those. The next way that populations can adapt is by variability. Remember, in this whole unit, we've been learning about variability and how organisms can vary. They can be different. And so remember that they can be different because of meiosis. During meiosis, crossing over occurs. We also learned about the law of segregation and the law of independent assortment that create different gametes. And because there's different gametes, that means that different traits are being passed on, and you can be different than someone else. Which leads us to genes and alleles. Remember that some genes and alleles are dominant and some are recessive. And if you have dominant genes, they may be stronger and you'll be able to live longer and pass those on to your offspring. Even recessive ones can be strong. Mutations. If a mutation occurs in your DNA, that random mutation could be a cause for you to be able to live and reproduce, or that could be a mutation that causes you to die. So for example, in this variability, again, we talk about plants. And so maybe there's some plants that are tall and some plants that are short. And the ones that are tall are able to get that full sunlight, and they shade over these small, short little ones. And so unfortunately, these short ones don't get as much sun and they will die off, which means they didn't reproduce, they didn't pass on their traits, and so the trait that's being passed on is this tall one because they lived, they reproduced. Which leads us to heritability. So to inherit something means that you got the traits from your parents. And so in our example of these plants, only the tall plants were surviving, and so therefore the trait for being tall was passed on to these other offspring. And so now there's a whole population of flowers that are tall. Lastly, we're talking about environment. Environmental changes can cause changes to population. So first off, an example about pollution. And the example is peppered moths. So here are the peppered moths. There are some that are full on black color and there's some that are kind of speckled. And when the Industrial Revolution occurred, there was a lot of pollution in the air. And that pollution caused the nearby forest to be covered in this black soot. And so before the Industrial Revolution, the population of the speckled one, which you can kind of see right here, they were able to, there was a lot of them because they could blend in, they could hide from predators. And this black one couldn't. They stood out, the predators ate them. However, after the Industrial Revolution, things got changed, and all of this that's white colored here got turned black. So now the black ones could hide, and the speckled ones, because they were lighter in color, they stood out and the predators ate them. So here's what happened. Here's before the Industrial Revolution, and here's after. And so here we see that before the Industrial Revolution, the population of the dark ones was really low, and population of the light ones was really high. But as time went on and the Industrial Revolution occurred and caused everything to be this black color because of pollution, the black ones could blend in, and so their population increased, and the light ones couldn't, and they got eaten and their population decreased. So we saw a change in population in this peppered moth because of that pollution. The next example is because of drought or rain. So the example is the finches. So over millions of years, all of a sudden, there went from one species of finch to 13 different species because of drought or rain. So when there was a drought, there weren't as many seeds, and the only seeds that were left were those giant spiky ones. And so only the finches with really big beaks could eat them, which means that those ones with big beaks survived and passed on the trait, and their population increased. And any finches with small beaks, their traits couldn't be passed on because they died, and so their population dwindled. So then here's all of the different finches, and you can see their different beak sizes. And then lastly, warmer or colder climates, and that was an example from your pre-assessment on DEVOs. Remember, DEVOs are just made up, but it was an example to start thinking about what really happens to them. So here's our final chart, and here's an example of it in my notebook. So go ahead and pause and record this in your notebook. So you are going to be given a worksheet on adaptations, and I'm going to quickly tell you about it. I only have about a minute left to tell you. And so first you're going to use the clues in each box to draw the adaptation. The shape of your organism can be whatever shape you want, and you're going to, in each box, draw just that one adaptation. So this first one asks for an adaptation that allows your creature to breathe underwater. So I'm going to draw my shape of organism, maybe just a circle, and I'm going to draw gills on it because gills help organisms breathe underwater. When I have each box finished, so just one adaptation per box, I'm going to draw my final organism that has all of these adaptations put together. And I'm going to draw that on the back of my paper, and I'm going to color it. And then finally, I'm going to create a story of what happened to the ancestors of the organism to cause population changes, to create this final organism that I have created. And so there's room on the back of the paper for that as well.